The capital world of Illyria shimmered, beneath 3 pale moons in a sky crowded with distant traffic lanes. Thousands of starships crossed the atmosphere every day, leaving thin streams of light that resembled glowing rivers flowing through the heavens. Beneath those skies stood the royal gardens, a place so vast that visitors often forgot they were standing in the middle of a planetary capital. Artificial trees grew beside ancient alien plants. Floating crystal flowers drifted gently through the air. Small maintenance drones buzzed between branches, trimming leaves according to instructions provided by a central botanical intelligence that considered itself the greatest gardener in the galaxy. Most people disagreed, especially Adrian. The human stood beside a glowing silver bush, staring at a hovering maintenance drone. No. The drone emitted a polite beep. Absolutely not. Another beep. You trimmed the wrong side yesterday. The drone projected a holographic message. Optimal beauty achieved. Adrian folded his arms. It looks like a frightened chicken. The drone paused, processing insult. Nearby workers laughed quietly. The argument had become a daily event. Moment later, the drone floated away as if offended. That's right, Adrian called after it. Run away from the truth. The workers laughed harder. Far above the garden's towering palace spires reflected sunlight across the city. Their surfaces shifted color every few seconds as living metal adjusted to temperature changes. The entire capital looked less like a city and more like something dreamed by an artist with unlimited resources. Adrian returned to his work. To everyone else he was simply a gardener, a quiet human who preferred plants over politics, a harmless man who spent most of his days repairing irrigation systems and complaining about drones. Exactly the reputation he wanted. The peaceful morning continued until movement appeared near the eastern pathway. Royal guards, several of them. Adrian immediately sighed. Whenever royal guards appeared, peace usually disappeared. The soldiers moved aside as a young woman entered the garden. She looked almost human, almost. Her long, elegant ears marked her as Illyrian royalty, Princess Lyra. Unlike most members of the royal family, she wasn't dressed in ceremonial clothing. Instead, she wore a simple blue jacket and practical trousers. She looked relieved, as if escaping somewhere. The guards stopped at a respectful distance. Lyra walked toward Adrian. You look disappointed to see me. Adrian pointed toward the guards. I was having a wonderful morning. Nobody had threatened me with paperwork. The princess smiled. Nobody is threatening you with paperwork. Then why are they here? They protect me. They look like they protect documents. One guard looked offended. Another tried not to laugh. Lyra shook her head. You shouldn't tease royal security. I'll stop when they stop staring at flowers like their enemy combatants. One guard immediately looked away from a nearby flower. The princess laughed. It was genuine, unrestrained sound rarely heard inside the palace. For a moment neither of them noticed the guards exchanging surprised glances. The princess had spent months attending diplomatic meetings, ceremonies, and political negotiations, yet she seemed happier talking to a gardener. As they walked through the pathways together, floating flowers drifted around them. Lyra glanced toward the distant city. Sometimes I wish I could leave the palace without 20 people following me. Adrian nodded. Have you tried becoming gardener? She smiled. Would that work? No, the drones would defeat you within a week. The princess laughed again. For a few moments, everything felt peaceful. Yet Adrian's eyes briefly drifted toward a distant observation tower. A figure stood there, watching far away. Almost impossible to notice. Almost. The figure disappeared seconds later. Lyra never saw it, but Adrian did, and for the first time that morning, his smile faded slightly, only for a moment. Then he looked back toward the princess and continued their conversation as if nothing had happened. The following evening, the royal gardens glowed beneath thousands of floating lantern plants. Their translucent petals absorbed sunlight during the day and released it after sunset, covering the pathways in soft silver and blue light. Princess Lyra sat on the edge of a small bridge overlooking an artificial stream. Tiny robotic fish swam beneath the surface, carrying microscopic cleaning systems inside their bodies. The palace engineers proudly called them a masterpiece of environmental technology. Adrian called them expensive fish. They cost more than a starfighter, he said. Lyra blinked. You're exaggerating. I'm not. She looked down at the glowing fish. They're very beautiful. They clean dirt. They do it beautifully. Adrian considered that. That's actually a good argument. The princess smiled. Over the past several weeks, these conversations had become routine. Whenever royal responsibilities became overwhelming, she escaped to the gardens. Somehow, the human gardener always managed to make the enormous weight on her shoulders feel smaller. For a while they sat quietly. Above them, streams of starships crossed the night sky. A diplomatic convoy arrived from another sector. Massive cruisers descended toward orbital stations, their engines shining like artificial stars. The capital was becoming busier every day. Soon representatives from dozens of worlds would arrive for the Galactic Unity Summit, the most important diplomatic gathering in decades. Everyone in the palace talked about it. Everyone except Adrian. That alone made Lyra curious. You never ask about the summit. Adrian looked at the sky. Politics gives me headaches. You've never even attended a political meeting. I don't need to jump into a volcano too. No, I wouldn't enjoy it. Lyra laughed. That's not how diplomacy works. That's exactly how diplomacy works. Before she could reply, a maintenance drone suddenly descended from above. It hovered directly in front of Adrian. Identity confirmation required. Adrian groaned. Oh no. The drone projected a holographic document nearly 2 m tall. Administrative Form 772B. Lyra immediately started laughing. What is that? My enemy? The drone emitted a warning beep. Disrespect detected. See. Adrian pointed at it. That's how they begin. The drone refused to leave until he completed the form. Several minutes later, after answering absurd questions regarding soil composition and flower migration patterns, the machine finally floated away. Lyra was still laughing. I've seen ambassadors interrogated less aggressively. The flowers run this planet. She nodded seriously. I suspected that. Their laughter faded as another convoy crossed the sky. This one caught Adrian's attention. His eyes followed the ships until they disappeared beyond the horizon. Something about their formation bothered him, only slightly, but enough. Lyra noticed. What is it? Nothing. You always say that when it's something. Adrian remained silent. Years of habit made him observe details Automatically ship spacing escort. Positions, communication patterns. Things most civilians ignored, things he noticed without even trying. 1. Transport vessel had altered its approach path briefly before correcting itself, a small detail perhaps. Meaningless perhaps not. He stored the information away the same way he stored hundreds of observations every day. Lyra leaned forward. You looked worried. I'm thinking dangerous activity. Very. She smiled. For a moment everything felt normal again. Then a shadow moved across a nearby rooftop. Adrian noticed it. Instantly, a figure watching. The second time in 2 days, the shape disappeared. Almost immediately, too quickly for ordinary eyes, too deliberately for coincidence. His expression remained calm, but inside old instincts stirred. Instincts he had spent years trying to bury beneath gardening tools and peaceful routines. Lyra never noticed the rooftop. She was busy watching the stars. Do you ever miss Earth? She asked softly. Adrian looked upward. A distant memory crossed his face, so much that sometimes I don't. The answer confused her. Before she could ask what it meant, palace security alarms briefly activated. Somewhere far beyond the gardens, just a short pulse, then silence. The princess frowned. Probably another security drill. Probably. Yet Adrian continued staring toward the distant city lights, because in his experience the most dangerous moments often began with people saying the word probably, and tonight, for reasons he couldn't fully explain, the capital suddenly felt less peaceful than it had yesterday. 3 days later, the capital world no longer felt like the quiet planet Adrian had grown used to. The Galactic Unity Summit had begun. Thousands of visitors flooded the city. Delegations from distant star systems arrived aboard enormous diplomatic vessels that filled orbital space. The skies above Illyria glittered day and night with streams of incoming traffic. Every hotel, embassy, and government tower was overflowing. Even the gardens were crowded. Adrian stood on a floating maintenance platform 20 m above the ground, attempting to position a cluster of ceremonial crystal flowers along the main diplomatic route. Attempting, not succeeding. The platform's navigation system suddenly spun in a slow circle. Adrian grabbed the railing. Oh, come on, system update complete. I didn't ask for an update. Thank you for your feedback. You didn't receive any feedback. Your feedback has been recorded. Adrian stared at the machine. The machine stared back with a cheerful holographic smile. Sometimes he suspected technology enjoyed irritating people below him. Workers laughed. The platform finally stabilized for now. Across the gardens, preparations continued at an incredible pace. Security drones hovered through the air. Translator satellites synchronized with visiting languages. Autonomous cleaning robots polished walkways until they reflected the sky itself. Everything had to be perfect. The summit represented decades of diplomacy. One mistake could create conflict between entire worlds, which was exactly why Adrian found the situation stressful. Not because he cared about politics, because politics attracted dangerous people. His eyes drifted toward the crowds. Thousands of faces, thousands of movements, most of them harmless. A few were not. The feeling lingered, that same feeling he'd experienced for days. Someone was watching, someone patient, someone disciplined. A few hours later, Princess Lyra arrived. She looked exhausted, dark. Circles sat beneath her eyes. Her elegant long ears drooped slightly. "You look terrible," Adrian said. "Thank you. You're welcome," she sighed. Dramatically, "I spent 6 hours discussing trade routes. I would rather wrestle an asteroid. I nearly did that." Earned a smile from Adrian. The princess sat beside a glowing fountain while security personnel remained nearby. For a few minutes they enjoyed rare silence. Then a diplomatic delegation passed through the gardens. The group wore elaborate ceremonial armor covered in glowing gemstones. One ambassador stopped and stared at a decorative tree. "What species is this?" Adrian answered. Before anyone else could, "A very expensive one." The ambassador nodded. "Seriously?" Several aides immediately recorded the answer. Lyra burst out laughing. The ambassador looked confused. Adrian simply walked away before anyone could ask further questions. Later that evening, final rehearsals began for the summit's central ceremony. Representatives from dozens of worlds gathered inside the enormous celestial plaza. The structure itself was astonishing, a massive open-air complex surrounded by floating crystal towers and suspended energy bridges. Adrian had been assigned to supervise botanical decorations, a task he preferred. Plants rarely started wars usually while inspecting flower arrangements near the plaza entrance. He noticed something unusual, a maintenance worker. At least that was what the uniform claimed. The individual pushed a supply cart toward a restricted area. Nothing strange about that, except the worker never once looked at the surroundings, never checked directions, never hesitated, like someone who already knew every detail. Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly. The worker disappeared into a service corridor. Seconds later, Adrian quietly followed. The corridor beyond was empty. Completely empty. No worker, no cart. Nothing. The disappearance was impossible unless advanced cloaking technology was involved. Adrian remained motionless. For a long moment he studied the corridor walls. Then he noticed it, a tiny distortion in the air. Gone almost instantly. Someone had been there, someone highly trained. His expression remained calm, but inside, alarm bells began ringing. Hours later, he submitted a security report. The officer reviewing it barely looked interested. A suspicious worker vanished. Yes. During summit preparations. Yes. The officer shrugged. "We've had 17 false alarms today." Adrian sighed. "Wonderful." The officer smiled. "Don't worry. Security is full, all-terrain air fully prepared." That sentence worried Adrian more than anything because, throughout his life, every disaster he had witnessed had been preceded by someone confidently declaring that everything was under control. As night settled over the capital, he stood alone near the gardens. Far above, hundreds of diplomatic ships glittered among the stars. The city appeared peaceful, safe, orderly, yet the uncomfortable feeling remained. Someone had entered the capital, someone skilled enough to evade security systems, someone willing to hide in the shadows while the entire galaxy focused on diplomacy. And Adrian knew one thing with absolute certainty: people like that never traveled across star systems to admire flowers. The day of the central ceremony arrived. Beneath clear skies and 3 brilliant moons that still lingered faintly above the horizon, every major news network in the galaxy was broadcasting live from The celestial plaza, thousands of delegates filled the enormous structure. Representatives from dozens of worlds occupied floating platforms suspended above shimmering energy fields. Translator drones hovered overhead. Security forces stood at every entrance. To most people, the event looked perfect. To Adrian, it looked crowded. And crowds made problems difficult to see. He adjusted a decorative crystal flower near the main stage while glancing across the plaza. His eyes never stopped moving. Years of habit. Years he preferred not to think about. Nearby, Princess Lyra stood beside members of the royal family. Her ceremonial clothing shimmered with threads of living silver. Her long ears carried elegant jewelry that marked her royal status. She looked nervous. The entire galaxy was watching. Their eyes met briefly. Adrian offered a small nod. The princess smiled a little. Of her tension disappeared. Then the ceremony began. Music echoed across the plaza. Diplomats exchanged greetings. Speeches started. Several minutes later, Adrian found himself trapped beside two ambassadors arguing about trade regulations. I would rather fight. Black hole, Adrian muttered. One ambassador heard him. Excuse me. Nothing. The ambassador nodded. Good, Adrian immediately regretted standing there. Then it happened. Single security drone exploded. Not violently, precisely. A small flash, a burst of sparks for half a second. Nobody reacted. Then dozens of emergency alerts activated simultaneously. The atmosphere changed instantly. Adrian was already moving. The first assassin appeared above the plaza. A cloaked figure dropped from a maintenance tower. Another emerged from a crowd of delegates. A third materialized on a floating platform. Advanced camouflage technology vanished as weapons activated. Panic erupted. Guests screamed. Security officers rushed toward the threat. Too slowly, far too slowly. The assassins were not aiming at the crowd, they were aiming at Lyra. Nearest guard raised his weapon. A pulse round struck him before he could fire. The princess froze. Everything happened. Within seconds, one assassin sprinted toward her position. Another fired from long range. A third launched combat drones into the air. Adrian sighed a very tired sigh, the kind someone makes when a peaceful day is officially ruined. Oh, not today. The nearest assassin reached striking distance. Then Adrian stepped forward. The attacker swung an energized blade. Adrian moved aside effortlessly. The weapon missed completely before the assassin could react. Adrian grabbed his arm and redirected the momentum. The attacker flew over a railing and crashed into a decorative fountain. The entire plaza fell silent for one confused second. Nobody understood what they had witnessed. Then another assassin charged. Adrian stepped forward. Single movement, a single strike. The attacker collapsed. The third assassin activated two combat drones. Machines accelerated toward Adrian at frightening speed. He picked up a ceremonial chair. A chair. Several diplomats stared in disbelief. Adrian threw it. The chair smashed into one drone. Fragments scattered everywhere. The second drone attempted an attack from behind without turning around. Adrian caught it as if someone had tossed him a ball. The machine struggled in his hand. He examined it briefly. Horrible design. Then he threw it into a wall. The explosion echoed across the plaza. Silence followed, absolute silence. The surviving assassins hesitated. That was their mistake. Adrian's expression changed. The relaxed gardener disappeared. Something older appeared. Something dangerous. His posture shifted. His eyes hardened. For the first time, traces of the man he used to be became visible. One assassin whispered something. Another immediately took a step backward. Recognition, fear. The attackers suddenly understood something nobody else did. The human standing before them was not a gardener. One assassin attempted to flee. Adrian moved faster than anyone thought possible. Moments later, the attacker lay unconscious beside the others. The entire battle had lasted less than a minute. Less than a minute. Thousands of spectators stared in shock. Security forces finally arrived, far too late. Lyra looked at Adrian. Her mind struggled to process what she had just seen. A quiet man who argued with gardening drones. The man who complained about paperwork. The man who made her laugh. He defeated elite assassins as if they were inconveniences. Neither spoke. For several long seconds they simply stared at each other. Then Adrian glanced around the destroyed plaza. He looked at the shattered fountain, the broken chair, the damaged decorations, and sighed. The flowers are never going to forgive me for this. The capital had not stopped talking about the attack. For 3 straight days, every major news network replayed the same footage. The gardener, the chair, the assassins, the impossible speed, the confused diplomats, the broken fountain, especially the broken fountain. Apparently, someone had created an entire discussion channel dedicated to analyzing the tactical use of decorative furniture in combat. Adrian deeply regretted discovering that fact. He sat alone inside the royal gardens, trimming a glowing bush while pretending the galaxy had not become obsessed with him. It wasn't working. A hovering camera drone descended from above. Mr. Adrian, is it true you defeated 7 assassins while armed only with a chair? No. The drone paused. You did not. I was also armed with disappointment. The drone remained silent. Then it flew away. Several workers nearby laughed. Adrian sighed. His peaceful life had officially ended. The sound of approaching footsteps drew his attention. Princess Lyra. Unlike the previous days, she arrived without smiling. Her long ears were slightly lowered. She stopped a few meters away. For a moment neither spoke. The silence felt strange, different. The attack had changed something. Finally, Lyra crossed her arms. You lied to me. Adrian looked at the bush. Technically, I simply failed to mention several important details. The princess stared at him. He stared at the bush. The bush wisely remained neutral. You defeated professional assassins. Apparently, you moved faster than military combat drones. Those drones weren't particularly impressive. Adrian. He finally looked up. The humor faded slightly from his face. For the first time since the attack, she saw genuine weariness in his eyes, not physical exhaustion. Something older, much older. Who are you? She asked quietly. Question lingered between them. Adrian remained silent for several seconds. Breeze moved through the floating flowers. Far above, traffic lanes glowed across the afternoon sky. Finally he spoke. A long time ago I was a soldier. Lyra waited. The answer clearly wasn't complete. A very good soldier. How good, Adrian thought about that. Then he pointed toward a nearby tree. Imagine that tree starts a war. The tree, she nodded. I'm listening. The government sends an army. Reasonable. The army fails. The tree sounds dangerous. Then they send my unit. Lyra blinked. That's your explanation. It's a simplified version. She couldn't help smiling, only briefly. Yet beneath the humor she sensed something serious, something painful. What happened? Adrian's gaze drifted toward the sky. For a moment he seemed far away. I spent too many years fighting. The answer was simple, but the weight behind it wasn't. Lyra suddenly understood that the stories were probably worse than anything she could imagine. Entire star systems knew his name. The assassins had recognized him, feared him. That didn't happen by accident. Why become a gardener? She asked. Adrian immediately pointed toward a flower. Flowers rarely shoot at me. The princess laughed as Lyra said, there it is. What? The joke. I have no idea what you're talking about. She shook her head. For the first time since the attack, the tension eased slightly, yet new problems were already forming because elsewhere in the capital, deep beneath an abandoned transport station, a hidden transmission activated. Several figures stood around a holographic table. Their leader studied footage from the failed assassination again and again. The image showed Adrian defeating the attackers. Silence filled the room. Finally, one of the figures spoke. Impossible, the leader disagreed. No, a new image appeared above the table, an old military file, classified. Restricted. Feared. The file displayed a younger version of Adrian. Several people around the table immediately became uneasy. One stepped backward. Another looked pale. The leader's expression darkened. So he survived. No one answered because everyone in the room knew the reputation attached to that name. Entire campaigns, entire wars, entire fleets. The human gardener was not supposed to exist anymore. Leader slowly closed the file. Prepare. Phase 2. Back in the gardens, Adrian suddenly stopped trimming flowers. Familiar feeling settled in his chest. Danger distant but approaching. The same instinct that had kept him alive through countless battlefields. Lyra noticed immediately. What is it? Adrian looked toward the horizon. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he forced a small smile. Probably nothing, the princess groaned. That's exactly what you said before the assassination attempt. Yes, and now you're saying it again. Also yes. She pointed a finger at him. That's not reassuring. Adrian couldn't argue with that, because deep down he suspected the attack at the summit had never been the real plan. It had only been the beginning. A week after the assassination attempt, the capital had become the safest planet. The sector, according to official reports. Adrian had learned long ago that official reports in reality were often distant relatives. He stood in the middle of a palace training field while 20 royal guards formed a defensive line. In front of him, the guards wore advanced combat armor equipped with predictive targeting systems, reflex enhancement modules, and personal energy shields. Each soldier looked confident. Adrian was holding a rake. Princess Lyra sat nearby watching. She already suspected what was about to happen. Guards did not. The captain stepped forward. Are we really doing this? Adrian nodded. Absolutely. With a Gardening tool, it builds character. The captain sighed. 3 seconds later, he was lying on the ground. The other guard stared. Adrian leaned on the rake. Lesson 1: nobody moved. Never underestimate a gardener. The training session only became more embarrassing. From there, within 15 minutes, every guard had been defeated, not injured, not humiliated intentionally, simply outmatched. Lyra laughed so hard at one point that she nearly fell from her seat. The captain eventually removed his helmet. I spent 12 years in military academies. Adrian nodded sympathetically. A tragic waste of time. The captain looked genuinely offended. The princess laughed again. For a brief moment, the atmosphere felt light, normal, almost peaceful. Then Adrian's communicator activated. A secure transmission. His expression changed. Immediately, the humor vanished. Lyra noticed, so did everyone else. What happened? She asked. Adrian stared at the message. Several surveillance networks across the capital had detected unusual activity. Not one location. Multiple, carefully coordinated, professionally executed. Someone was preparing something. The question was, what? Hours later, Adrian and Lyra stood inside a secure intelligence center. Beneath the palace, gigantic holographic displays filled the room. Data streams flowed through the air. Security officials analyzed information gathered from orbital satellites, planetary sensors, and countless surveillance systems. An officer enlarged several images: warehouse districts, transit hubs, abandoned maintenance tunnels. At first glance, the locations appeared unrelated. Adrian studied them quietly. Then his eyes narrowed. No, the room turned toward him. An officer frowned. No, what? These locations aren't random. The holographic map expanded. Adrian walked closer. For several moments he simply stared. Then he began marking points. 1, 2, 3, 4. A pattern slowly emerged. Several officers exchanged worried looks. Lyra immediately noticed it. The locations formed a network surrounding critical communication facilities across the capital. The realization hit everyone at once. They're not planning another assassination, Lyra said. Adrian nodded. They're preparing something bigger. The room became silent. Much bigger. If those facilities were attacked simultaneously, planetary communications would collapse. Emergency responses would fail. Military coordination would suffer. Panic would spread. Exactly the kind of chaos capable of triggering conflict between governments already struggling with political tension. Someone wanted war. The question was why. An intelligence officer activated another database. Thousands of classified records appeared. Suspects, organizations, known enemies. Adrian scanned them quickly. Then he froze. One file, one name, a name he had not seen in years. The room suddenly felt colder. Lyra noticed immediately. You know who it is? It wasn't a question. Adrian remained silent. His gaze remained fixed on the hologram. Finally he nodded. Maybe. The answer worried her more than certain he would have, because she had never seen him look like that. Not during the assassination attempt, not during the investigation, not ever. Hours later, they left the intelligence center together. Night covered in the capital. Thousands of lights illuminated the skyline. Traffic streams crossed the heavens. Everything looked peaceful, yet both knew the city was standing on the edge of something dangerous. Lyra glanced at him. Who are we dealing with? For a long moment, Adrian said nothing. The wind moved through nearby trees. Far away, a transport ship disappeared into orbit. Finally, he spoke. Years ago, there was a commander. His voice sounded distant, careful, like someone opening an old wound. He was brilliant. Lyra listened quietly. He believed peace was impossible. The princess frowned. And now, Adrian looked toward the stars. He'll probably try to prove it. At that exact moment, deep beneath the city, hidden operatives activated another phase of their plan, encrypted. Communication spread through secret channels, weapons were distributed. Targets were assigned, a countdown began, and for the first time since arriving on Illyria, Adrian felt the unmistakable certainty that the coming battle was no longer avoidable. Someone from his past had finally found him, and this time they hadn't come for a princess, they had come for him. Attack began just before dawn. Across the capital, communication towers suddenly went dark. Emergency networks failed. Several orbital relays stopped responding. For a few terrifying minutes, confusion spread throughout the planet, exactly as the conspirators intended. But this time the defenders were ready. Inside the Royal Command Center, alarms echoed through massive halls while holographic battle maps filled the air. Princess Lyra stood beside military officers as reports flooded in. Sector 12 secure. Transit Grid 4 under attack. Hostile vessels detected in upper orbit. The situation changed every second, yet, unlike the nervous princess who had once escaped into the gardens to avoid responsibility, Lyra remained calm, focused, confident. Adrian noticed immediately she had changed, grown, and somehow that realization made him smile. "Why are you smiling?" she asked. "Galaxy is falling apart. You handle diplomacy. That's not an answer." "It is for me." Before she could respond, another alert appeared. Enemy warships, 6 of them, large enough to threaten the entire capital. The mastermind had finally revealed himself. A holographic image materialized above the command table. An older human, gray hair, cold eyes. General Marcus Voss, the man Adrian had once followed into battle, the man who believed peace was merely a pause between wars. Several officers looked nervous. Adrian did not, mostly because he was busy being annoyed. He's still using that dramatic entrance. Lyra blinked. "That's your reaction?" He always loved speeches, as if on cue. Voss began speaking. "Citizens of Illyria." Adrian muted the transmission. The room stared at him. "What?" He was introducing himself. Lyra said, "He'll survive." Within minutes, the defense operation began. Royal forces launched from orbital stations, planetary defense platforms activated, thousands of drones filled the sky. Yet the most important battle wasn't happening in orbit. It was happening beneath the city. The hidden command center controlling the attacks had finally been located, and Adrian intended to end it. 1 hour later, he and a strike team descended into abandoned transit tunnels deep below the capital. The corridors stretched for kilometers. Beneath the surface, old transport systems flickered weakly. Shadow covered everything. The enemy expected soldiers. They did not expect Adrian. The confrontation came quickly. Elite operatives blocked the final chamber. The same organization responsible for the assassination attempt. The same killers who had once terrorized entire sectors. Several recognized him. Immediately, one quietly lowered his weapon, another muttered something that sounded remarkably like a prayer. Adrian sighed. I really hoped we could avoid all this. Nobody believed him. Minutes later, the path was clear. The final chamber opened. Marcus Voss stood, waiting beside a massive communication core connected to orbital systems throughout the planet. For a moment, neither man spoke. Years of history filled the silence. Finally, Voss smiled. You disappeared. I became gardener. Voss stared. I genuinely can't tell if that's a joke. It isn't. For the first time all day, Voss looked confused. Then the battle began. Not a chaotic fight, not an angry one. Two veterans, two men carrying different visions of the future. The struggle moved through the chamber while energy fields flashed around them. Outside, fleets battled above the world. Inside, the conflict that had begun years ago finally reached its end. When it was over, Voss lay defeated beside the communication core. The attack collapsed. Immediately, enemy fleets surrendered or fled. The conspiracy ended. The war that almost began never happened. Hours later, sunlight returned to the capital. Citizens emerged into peaceful streets. Communications were restored. The summit resumed. For the first time in weeks, everything felt quiet. A few days later, Adrian stood once again inside the royal gardens, exactly where the story had begun. The flowers floated peacefully. The fountains worked. Again, even the broken one, Princess Lyra, approached. No guards followed. No alarm sounded. No assassins appeared. Remarkable improvement. For a while, they simply walked together. The capital celebrated him as a hero. Entire worlds wanted interviews. Military academies requested lectures. Several governments attempted recruitment. He declined everything. Lyra smiled. So what now? Adrian looked around the gardens. The flowers, the trees, the ridiculous maintenance drones, the peaceful life he had almost lost. Then he smiled. I think the bushes need trimming. As if summoned by fate itself, a maintenance drone descended. Administrative form 772B. Requires completion. Adrian stared at it. The drone stared back. Lyra immediately started laughing. The human who had defeated assassins' armies, Aryan warships, looked genuinely horrified. Not again. The drone emitted a cheerful beep. For the first time in many years, Adrian laughed too. Not because a battle was won, not because a war had been prevented, but because he finally understood something. Peace was not something you fought for. Once it was something you chose every day. And standing beneath the bright skies of Illyria, surrounded by friends instead of enemies, he realized that for the first time since leaving Earth, he had finally found a place he could call home.